Hello everybody and welcome to the first video in our series of videos on the Reformation. As always, we begin with our learning outcomes, so by the end of this presentation you guys should be able to recall your previous studies of the Catholic Church. You guys should know the 5 abuses of the Church listed and be able to define them, and finally you guys should know what Purgatory was. In this series of videos we will be looking at the causes and consequences of an event known as the Reformation, in which church reformers rebelled against the corruption of the Catholic Church and set up their own churches, known collectively or altogether as the Protestant churches. So to begin with, let's have a quick recap of what we have studied about the Catholic Church in our study of ancient Rome, early Christian Ireland, the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. So we know that Christianity was founded around 40 CE, and Christians were persecuted by the Romans until Emperor Constance passed the Edict of Milan in 312 CE, allowing for religious toleration for the Christian religion. He then converted to Christianity on his deathbed, with religion becoming the official religion of the empire. All emperors after Constantine, except for one, were all Christian until the end of the Roman Empire. We then saw the creation of Monastic Orders who followed the rules of St. Benedictine in Umbria in 529 CE, and how they spread throughout Europe and Ireland in the early Christian Irish period. We also saw in the Middle Ages how new monastic orders developed, like the Dominicans and the Franciscans in the 13th century. We saw how there was a split in the church in 1054 known as the Great Schism, where the church split into the Catholic Church in the west of Europe and the Orthodox Church in the east of Europe. We also saw in the Middle Ages the bloody campaigns launched by the Pope known as the Crusades, which lasted from roughly 1095 to 1270, in which the Catholic Church tried to retake the Holy Land centered around Jerusalem from the Islamic Empire. And finally, we saw during the Renaissance how popes began to use church funds to sponsor new churches and cathedrals, starting with Pope Nicholas V, and how the richest families in Italy used their wealth to secure high positions in the church. So that is a lot of history that we have covered, and we are going to focus in on some of the main abuses within the church that led to the Reformation starting in 1517. There are generally 5 main abuses within the church which caused people to turn away from Catholicism that we agree upon. They embraced these new Protestant churches because of the 5 things labelled here: pluralism, absenteeism, the sale of indulgences, nepotism and simony. And a handy acronym to remember these is PAINS. So what were these 5 abuses? So pluralism was when a priest or bishop or cardinal had more than one parish or diocese. The reason for having multiple parishes or dioceses was because they were entitled to the money from them which would make them richer, the tithe, which again we met in our study of the Middle Ages. The next abuse, absenteeism, meant that the bishops, the cardinals or priests, were not in their area. If a priest was absent, Mass could go unsaid for months, and bishops and cardinals ignored their duties in these dioceses. Our third abuse, the sale of indulgences. So indulgences were pieces of paper that the church sold or gave to people. For example, in the First Crusade, Pope Urban II had offered indulgences to anyone who went on crusade, saying that all their sins would be forgiven. But the most popular form of indulgence was one that people bought to help people get to heaven quicker when they died. The church told people when they died that they went to a place called Purgatory before they could go to heaven. It was a place of great suffering where a soul would be cleansed before it went to heaven, which it is believed the church made up this idea of purgatory around the 12th century. But if you gave the church money by buying an indulgence, you could shorten your time or the time of a loved one in purgatory. Nepotism was our next abuse, and this was helping family members by appointing them to high-ranking positions in the church. For example, Pope Sixtus IV appointed 6 of his nephews and cousins as cardinals, and Pope Calixtus III, the first Pope from the infamous Borgia family appointed family members into high positions. This would eventually allow for his nephew to be elected Pope Alexander VI, who was probably one of the most infamous popes when he became Pope in 1492. The final abuse we will be looking at is simony, which is the buying and selling of church positions. Again, Alexander VI of this Borgia family was a great example of this. He paid off a lot of cardinals to make sure that he became Pope. And it was abuses like this and the overall continued less than devout behaviour of those in charge who were meant to be the most holy that had people ready for something different. A good example of this type of behaviour was an event known as the Western Schism or the Papal Schism. So in 1305, the then Pope actually moved out of Rome and he moved the Papacy, or where the Pope sat, to Avignon. This is known as the Babylonian Captivity. Avignon is in France. And the Pope here was under the influence of the kings of France more so than he had been before. And nearly 70 years later, Pope Gregory XI returned to Rome, but then when he died there was a split in the church and Rome elected a pope, and Avignon then elected another pope known as the anti-pope. In 1409 they tried to fix this by calling a church council in Pisa, where both the pope and the anti-pope were asked to resign and a new pope was to be elected, but they didn't resign, so now they had 3 popes. Finally, in 1414, the Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund called the Council of Constance, the Council of Constance, to deal with the situation involving the 3 popes and some other pesky business. Here, all 3 popes resigned, and a new pope, Pope Martin V, was elected in 1417, who decided to reside in Rome. But it was incidents like these that really damaged the spiritual authority that the church claimed to have. And we will see in our next video 2 early reformers who rebel against this chaos. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. So by now you guys should be able to recall all your previous studies of the Catholic Church. You guys should know the 5 abuses of the church that were listed, and you should be able to give a definition for all of them. And finally, you guys should know what purgatory was and be able to give a definition of that. Thanks for watching. Hope you guys got something good from this video.